So let's say that we had our screen on so you could see it. You had some kind of callback function that was going to need to modify parts of your main client. Well, if we didn't make our main client so full of information like we did last time, it ought to be a smaller gadget than what it was, then we would be better off. But we made it a large thing, and rather than re-architect it completely, which lecture are we on? Element O. Alrighty. What we're going to do is to just instantiate our main class and move all the code that's in the main method into another method. And then all that the main method of our client code is going to do is to call the other to instantiate the class and to invoke its main method. Alright, so let's say that for whatever purposes I decided that I was going to have some kind of static void, write file function. System.out.println. I'm writing a file, and I don't care if y'all type this in or not. Right, like that. And I needed to make a class that would call that write file function. So class, useful, whatever this useful class is. It's supposed to have, or it's our useful thread, whatever. I'm not going to actually implement threading code because that takes a little bit more time, But then the run method in it, public void run, needs to call that write file method. How do we do that? Now there may be another way of doing this, but what I've always done and what we see when we're doing the GUI interface design with the swing interface library is to just create a copy of our client code, invoke it, create it as an object. So instead of having all sorts of stuff in main, like something that creates a useful thread, ut equals new useful thread, and then run it, ut.run. Sure, it'd be nice if that would work. However, ut.run is not able to call this write file function. In C++, you can mark them as, you know what, that's not true at all. Alright, how about we just make this like a 1 more minute lecture and just remind ourselves that you can call static functions from anywhere as long as they're public, right? So as long as that's public, then, call write file. Wow, this was hard. Lecture 0.write file. I cannot believe that I had a brain fart on that, and stinky. Like that. Now we're done. Okay, I don't even know why I did not do it that way when I was talking about the threads. I'm totally confused as to why I didn't do it that way and why I marched in here thinking that I needed to pass to this reference. The reason why is because I was stuck on creating this references based on doing the GUI examples. So what I was talking about doing though is you could make this a non-static method. You could make this a non-static method. And really, I'm just probably going to abandon this completely, so why don't you just stop typing. And then you make a main method here, public void main args. I'm not going to make this one accept any args, or I could call it run or something like that. And then what is main going to do? It's just going to create a lecture O object and then it's going to run it. Me.main, like that. There we go. And a couple folk have been doing that anyways. Not sure if it's in this class or the online class, but whenever they wanted to run their code, as though, well, anyways, so now we have this reference we could play with, right? So now inside main, if we had to, we could pass this reference into our useful thread. To do that, we'd have to make useful thread have an object of that type, a reference to that type, Lecture O, other this, something like this, main thread this, something like this, and inside the constructor, we would have to allow ourselves to pass that in. And this looks silly, but this dot other this equals the other this that was passed in. By having done this, we can call any method that is defined in Lecture O. We want to call write file. Hey, no big deal. We can do that. I now have to pass in our this reference in order for the constructor to work. But when we want to call write file or modify variables inside the primary class, we can do that. Excuse me, it's called other this. All right, so that lets, if this was a thread, we would have a callback function that would be invoking methods inside our primary class. And the reason we were able to do that is we created an instance of ourself and then launched it like that, so that we had a this method with which to play. Hope that kind of makes sense. I had a student ask me, how to, actually I forget why, but they wanted to do exactly this. Not for the purposes of having the callback functions, but they wanted to turn their client code into something that could be executed. And so I just showed them, okay, all main does is it has to create a copy of our client class, an object of that type, and then we can treat it just like it was any other object. That gets us away from having to have static methods all over the place and the trouble of accessing the static methods. I guess one reason to do this is you might want to actually run several different versions of main, and each different version of main could have its own this method, right? We could create several Lecture O objects and invoke them. So as promised, I'm not going to do anything else with that. May just start a Lecture O2 file. Yeah, this is going to take us straight to the lecture, which is not what I want. Stop. So what we want to be doing in this one is we want to be able to get directory listings from the files, from the operating system. We want to be able to retrieve the list of the files and find out, attributes about them, like their file size or whether they're a directory entry, things like that. I've lost my lecture. I thought I had it queued up. Let's... Alright, sorry, we're going to do the user interface just because. I'm not going to waste any more of our time looking for it. Nope, not going to spend any more time looking for it. Alright, so what we're going to do is you can build the swing library dialogues by hand, but NetBeans comes with a swing dialogue and frame editor, which we're going to use. So I'm going to do new project, and I'm thinking that maybe we ought to do two parts of it. Maybe we ought to have a primary, window that's doing something, and then we ought to have some kind of login screen. So I'm going to make a new one called Lecture O GUI. And what I need to do is I'm going to come over here to my Lecture O GUI folder, don't tack it on anything else, and do new JFrame. There's also the JPanel. The JFrame should be your primary user window, and then JPanels are for like pop-up dialogues. So JFrame form. We could give it a nice good name like Lecture O. Lecture O2. So what you should see is a palette of controls and our window designer. We can toggle between the source and the design. If we look at the source, if we scroll and we find our main method, all we see that it's doing is making a new version of ourselves and running it. Doing those through a more sophisticated way of launching threads than what we were seeing, but it's doing the same trick that I just demonstrated. We're making ourselves, we're making an object based on this class and calling it rather than sticking a whole bunch of stuff in main. And so now we have this reference. We can do all sorts of things with that. We don't have to make everything a static member. We could have several copies of this window floating around at the same time if we so chose. Alright, so I'm going to, if we look here, how is this thing created? If we go up here, we will find, and by the way, things are marked off here with a minus sign. We see a whole bunch of stuff here. Init components. It's pretty important. So I'm going to right click on init components and go to source. And there it is. We are not allowed to edit the gray stuff. The forms designer modifies that, and yeah, you could open it up in a text file and make some changes to it, but once you did that, you'd no longer ever be able to use a form designer ever again. So we don't have anything that we've created with our designer. So the init components is pretty small. But each button we add is going to be added as a member of this class. Probably stick them down here. And then they will be instantiated inside the init components method. So let's add a couple things. One thing, let's add a button that's going to launch our login window. So I'm going to drag a button over. It's just going to say login. And I double clicked on it. Mistake. I can live with it though. Go back to the designer if you double click on it like I did. Right click. And we need to change its properties. The properties are listed all over here. But at least they allow us to edit the text without finding that in the properties. And they allow me to change the variable name. So if I choose edit text instead of button, I can choose login. And I might want to change its variable name from this very cryptic JButton1 to JButton_login. Or if you just want to call it login button, that would be fine. But I like leaving it with the name of the control, so it's real easy for me to find when I start typing this .jbutton, and it'll list all the JButtons that I've added to my form. So if we click on that and we come over here and look at the properties, there's all sorts of things we can change about it. What font it is, what its foreground color, what its background color is, things like that. And I'm just going to leave all that alone for now. And I'm going to make a panel that I might be able to hide or show based on whether they've logged in successfully or not. So from the swing container, I'm going to drag a panel out. I'm going to make it kind of big for whatever purposes we want to do with this. Now if we come over here and look at events, we will see that the login button has one event that's tied to it. It responds to being clicked, the action performed. And I created a spurious function when I double-clicked it, right? I double-clicked it and it was called JButton login action performed. I guess I'm okay with that. I guess that's a good enough method name. What's this going to do? For now, it's just going to print, login clicked. Except that's not how we print, is it? Excuse Mr. Python here. System.out.println login click. So when I run it, it should launch my JFrame. I can't say that I see it launching my JFrame. Somebody tell me it worked for them. If you hit the run button, do you get anything? Today is a bad, no good day. Oh, silly me. What's going on? We have two files in our project. If we go to O2, what do we see here? We see O2 and we see OGUI. Which main method is being invoked? The one inside O2, not the O2 GUI one. That's the name of that's the name of the class that was created by default, and it's not a very good one. All it has is main. And I even gave it a deceptive name. I called it OGUI, and that's a bad name. So what we need to do is we need to set the project to run the other main, not this one. And then we can delete this file entirely. That would be a good thing to do. So I'm going to go to Projects. There wouldn't be anything wrong with creating an object of this type. You just have to figure out, make sure that you have the correct class name, which is Lecture O2. That's a really lame class name. I'm going to rename it. So go back to your Java Swing one, go into source mode, scroll down to where it says public class Lecture O2 extends, and do a refactor, rename, and let's give it a far better name, like Lecture O2 _ JFrame, something like that. So I can go back to my other one, the one that was created by default. And what I really should have done, the thing that I glitched on, is when I made a new project, I should have told it not to make a main class. Create main class. That was my problem. I ought to, now that since we only have one ding dang button in it, I'm just going to completely restart, and I recommend you do too. So file new project, third time's a charm. Lecture O3 JFrame. Go to our designer. We don't have a JFrame yet, so inside source packages, default packages, right click, new, JFrame, form. And no matter what we call it, Lecture O3 JFrame. Let's drag our button out, and then I'll pause and make sure that everybody's caught up since I aborted and retried. I'm going to change the text of it, so I'm going to right click on it and choose Edit Text. I want this one to say Login. Now it's called Lecture O3, but as long as when you make it and do a new project and do Next and deselect Create Main Class, it really does not matter what you call it. The problem was I made a main class and then I went and I added a JFrame which also had a main method in it. Okay, so I'm in it. I have my login button. I'm going to rename my login button, change variable name, and it's going to be called JButton_login. And if I double click that function, it will create a method that is invoked when the login button is called. Except it instead went to the definition of it. If I double click it, it should take ourselves to the code. Here it is, JButton login action performed. And yes, ma'am?
I'm way behind. Can you help us get caught up to where you are?
I'm just going to do a fourth one, and I'm going to go very slowly, and I'm going to make everybody tell me when they're ready for the next step. New project, Lecture O4, finish. All right. When you do that new lecture, make sure that Create Main Class is deselected. If it's not deselected, we're going to create it. We're going to delete it from the project. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make that mistake. Hopefully you deselected it like I just told you to. But if you didn't, go to your lecture and just choose Delete File. So does everybody now have a project with nothing inside its source packages? No .java file. That's really what we want. Is an application, a project, with nothing inside it. Are we good there? You know how to make a new project. Okay, now click on source packages. Scroll down. Default package is empty. You're caught up. Are you good to go?
But I don't have that full screen thing.
Right. You're not there yet. I said I was going to go very slowly.
All right.
All right. Following along as well? Okay, so I'm going to make a brand new one. Right. Right, right. So Usually you want to create your main class, this time you don't. Okay, so now I'm going to create a J-frame. And yeah, I have my J-frame designer available, but that's because I keep creating projects, right? You know, I've got 20 different files open here. And if they were all closed, you wouldn't see the designer on my screen.
What do you want the form to be called?
Whatever you want. All right. So I'm going to go to Source Packages, right-click, New, J-frame form. And if you don't see J-frame form listed there, go to Other. Let me know if somebody has not found the new J-frame form option.
I've lost my navigation, I'm sorry. I was trying to close windows and
Yeah.
I don't know how to get back to that.
Right. Cancel. I don't know. It's displaying all that. Go to Projects.
It was highly recommended from
Okay.
now we're here.
Uh-huh.
You do what?
Right click on it. New. J-frame form.
Okay.
Oh, which one? Pardon me, miss?
Oh, no, I was just reading the warning.
Which is not to put things in
Yeah.
the default source package. Right, they want you to put everything in a package. And I don't see any reason for us to be creating a package here. Just makes things harder for me to read. So I'm going to right click on here, or have I already done that? Right click, New, J-frame form. I could just leave it called New J-frame, I don't care. All right, and then I'm back to my designer. Anybody stuck at this? Have we not gotten to the designer yet?
I don't have that top, that menu bar. So, like, where you keep switching between source design and history or whatever.
That's crazy. Well, drag a button out and double click on it. See if it magically appears. Okay, well you can tap to it that way, but you don't see. All right, first person to figure this out wins brownie points. We don't see in Simon's this toolbar.
Awesome, thanks.
Awesome. Excellent. All right.
You get all the brownie?
All the brownie points. Button, drag out a button. And I think I'm going to change its name. Nah. I don't see how to rename it from over here. So I'm going to right click on it and choose change variable name right here. J button underscore login. And I want to change the text for it. I could easily change the text of it by going over to properties. If you click properties, you see that one of the entries for the properties is the text. And so I could call it login. Or I could have right-clicked on it and done edit text. Now the instinct is to double click on it, but that creates a method for it, which we want to do pretty soon. All right. Are we good? Do we have a button on the screen with a good piece of text and a good variable name? It's okay if we don't. So I need to create a handler for the action performed event. You saw me click on events. There's all sorts of things we could do here. The easiest way to create an event for the button is just to double click on it. But you could go over here and use the Events tab of the Properties to create it, I just like double clicking on it. And if we scroll up, on mine it created it, but it didn't take us to the method. It instead took us to the bottom of the page where we see that our button widget is now one of the members of the class. So since that didn't work, I'm going to go back to the designer, double click it again, and we now, with a little scrolling, we see login action performed. And maybe that's what you saw the first time you double clicked on it. To do, add your handling code here. I'm just going to make it print something. System.out.println, parentheses quote, login button pressed. Now when I try to run it, it says, hey, there wasn't a main class. So select one. So I'm just going to select what shows. So make sure that works. If you click the green arrow, if it asks you to select a main class, go ahead and click it, and then hopefully it pops up a little window.
Good to go. It's running. It says it's running. Oops. There we go. Some dialogue. There we go.
I haven't made the panel. Remember, I aborted and retried, so I'm going to put a panel there. Yeah. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a panel from my palette and drag it on there. The reason you stick things in a panel is you can just visually group them together, and also you can hide and you can show the panel. Awesome. Maybe we right click on it and choose properties. Does it show properties? And you can probably dock it. I don't know how to dock it, but if you drag it over here, maybe it can still dock. No, but it's all right. Yeah, I'll get to it now. So if you don't have a properties tab on the side, just right click on one of the buttons in the form designer and choose properties. And then boom, we get the properties window. We could probably open up, we could probably find the properties under view, just like Brian had us do for the other toolbar. So I want to make a panel. I'm going to scroll up, drag a panel out of the swing containers.
Do we have to stop it from running?
Yeah, go ahead and kill your little app. Every time you run it, it shows up as a little coffee cup down here, so you can always click on it and kill it, or you can just kill it with the little scroll bar down here at the bottom that says running. Click the X. Okay. I need to give this panel a better name than just panel. Maybe just leaving it called panel is okay, but I want to find out what its variable name is. So I'm going to click on it, and it's called JPanel1. Good enough. So let's make the login, let's make another button that hides and shows the panel, just to show that we have control over it, or that enables and disables it. But let's do a hide show first. And look at that. When I can't see my panel, and I'm not liking the fact that I can't see my panel. So I'm thinking that I ought to modify some of the properties to make the panel a little bit more visible. So with the panel selected, if I go to properties, I ought to be able to find something like a background and maybe change its background. Something slightly more visible. Or I could have given it a border. That's pretty jarring, that blue. It's pleasing, it's soothing. There. But we seem to like boring things, boring colors, and lots of modern applications, so I just made it gray instead. So under properties, I found background and I changed it to some kind of gray. by clicking on the little pop-up box there. And I just did that because I couldn't see it. Awesome. Yours is even prettier than mine was. Got it? All right. All right, now I want to make a button that'll hide or show the window. I think I'm just going to call it toggle. I'm planning on getting rid of this one. I'm thinking that the control ought to start off invisible and not show up until they've logged in successfully. But I just want to be able to prove that we can make it visible and invisible. So I called it toggle. I could change the variable name as well, but since this variable is not real important to me and I'm going to delete it later, I don't really care, but I'm going to do it anyways. So JButton_toggle. And now for the fun part, I'm going to double click on it and add a method for it. And this time, on mine, it positioned my editor correctly. But I'm going to take a moment to show you. Now we've got three things, three variable declarations. And humans like to put all of our variables up at the top of the class. But computers are weird, and so it moved them all down to the bottom of the class. We can look to see where these things are instantiated. I have a button_login, so if I do Control F, button_login, I will see that each object was made inside my init components. And then we set the text of the login button. And I'm sure down here we set the text for the toggle button. And then we added an action listener so that when it is clicked, it will invoke our JButtonLogin action performed function. You could do all this stuff by hand. You don't have to use a forms designer to get this to work. But I want to make the toggle button do something. Let's stick something in our panel just so that we can see it disappear. I don't know what. Some kind of label. Just going to grab the label from the swing controls, put it here. I don't even care what it says at this point. I just want to see it disappear when I hide the panel. Now I'm going to go to the toggle. And we need to swap the state. If it's visible right now, then we want to make it invisible. And vice versa. So Boolean panel visible panel_visible equals, and I can't remember what that panel variable was called, so I'm going to use this dot to bring up a list of everything. That's way too many things, so I'm going to narrow it down by typing in jpanel. Okay, and I gave it a really boring name, and I remember now I never gave it a better name. So mine is called jpanel1 dot is visible. And honestly, we could toggle this with one line of code rather than the way I'm doing it. I'm just being kind of pedantic this way. And then let's swap the state of panel visible. Panel_visible visible equals exclamation mark panel_visible. And then we need to call set visible. So this dot J panel 1 dot set visible. And you notice a whole bunch of functions show up as we were doing that. We can control all sorts of things about it. We could change the color of it programmatically rather than pick it from the form designer. And I'm going to set it equal to the panel visitable value. So you see what we're doing here, and you also probably see that we could have just done this in one line of code. Would have stretched off my screen, but we could have. We would have done set visible parentheses exclamation point jpanel.getVisible. Let's see if that works. Yeah, hide and show. Ideally, we would also resize our window, right? So when we hit toggle, lost it. Then it would stretch out. We've seen panels like that. We've also seen tabbed panels right up at the top where you pick one and it replaces the contents of the current panel with a different one. Seen that like in, control panels for your operating system and fancy dialogues like that. Are we good to go? Oh, I just dragged something out on there so I could see it hide and show, but the fact that it's got a different color makes it very visible that it's being hidden or shown anyways.
Oh, okay.
So you don't need that there, or if you do, you can drag it out.
Good.
We may have two panels. Oh, is there a second panel for the buttons there? I see. No, no. Right click it. I don't see a second panel, so I don't know. Yeah, that's pretty weird. We'd have to figure out how to delete it. I think I know, but I'm not going to search. Let's just leave that alone for now. So what if we wanted to program some kind of tic-tac-toe game? I'm going to delete that label. I'm going to go to the designer. So I just selected it, hit delete. I'm going to drag out a 3x3 grid of buttons. Take a minute. I think 2 buttons would probably be enough. So we have a little 2x2 grid of button. 2x2 button grid. If we edit the text to wipe out the button text, unfortunately it shrinks the button down, which is annoying. But then you can grow it back out. And what I'm thinking is I might want to create a 2-dimensional array of buttons, and so if they click something, we can do something. And if it gets to be too much of a pain to resize these things, which it seems to be, it seemed to shrink it down as soon as I did that, which aggravates me. Thanks. I may change the text of these programmatically. I think I'm going to undo all those. Just leave those things, but then I'm going to make some activity button. Or maybe we can just do it down in main, or inside init components. We're going to set the text of those things. But we want to put them in an array so that we can start manipulating them. We might want to, change all the buttons' colors at one time. So I'm going to go to source. Now I have my 4 buttons. They really ought to have better names than that. And I need to find my init components method. And where is it called? It's called in the constructor. So the constructor would be a great place to change their text, to add them to an array. Why would you add them to an array? So you can manipulate them, not just by their name, but they could be in an array list, which you could, scroll through the array list and pull out information, set values. So in the past, when I wrote, a game, a Minesweeper style game or some other kind of game, then that's what I did. I created a 2-dimensional array of buttons. What are these buttons? What is this component called? It's called JButton, which I can confirm by going all the way down here, right? Java x.swing.jbutton. Fortunately, I think we can just call it JButton. So I'm going to come back to my constructor, the thing that calls init components. If you can't find it, just do Control F and look for init components, and it'll take you to it. But I want the array to be declared as a member of the class. Doesn't necessarily need to be public member. Wouldn't hurt. Public J button. Let's make it an array list. Public array list less than J button greater than buttons equals new array list less than greater than open parentheses close parentheses semicolon. It doesn't know what an array list is, so we're going to click over here and add the import. Oh, add the import for Java x.swing.jbutton. I should have typed out the whole name, but it'll fix this. So I added my 2 imports just to make the errors go away. So let's add those buttons to our array list. Currently we have 4 buttons that we care about that are in that grid, right? So buttons dot add parentheses, and they seem to be called just JButton1 through JButton4, but I could type in this dot JButton1, right, to get it to pull up quickly. Anyways, once I get it, I'm just going to copy and paste it and change it to JButton2, JButton3, JButton4. Alrighty, now we have. Let's prove that we could use this for something. Maybe we're going to just set the text all to empty. Change their background color or something. How do we change the background color of the panel? I'm going to go find that. We did set background. Well, look at that. Isn't that a lot of stuff? I don't recall if java.awt.color has any members where we could just specify its color. So I'm going to go back to my method. Somebody help me remember java.awt.color. Okay, so just to prove we can, let's just change the color of one of them before we put it in a loop. This dot J button 1 dot set background parentheses. Oh, see, that's what I wanted to see. Things like color red. We ought to put that in a loop. We can set them all equal to red. So I'm going to delete that. 4 parentheses J button space JB colon buttons for every button in our button list. Curly brace. JB dot, let's change this text. Set text, parentheses, quote, end quote. Now that I'm thinking about it, it'd be pretty neat to make each button like increase a counter, increase its own counter each time we clicked on it. But that would require creating a secondary array of values. Wouldn't take long to do that. We might do that. We might move on to another topic. Okay, let's see if that works. I'm going to run it and see whether those buttons are all blanked out. Yep. Well, aren't those cute little itty bitty things? I could set their height and their width and change their positions around through the form designer. I should have gone ahead and just knuckled down and removed the text through the right through the form designer and then dragged them where I wanted to be. I'm not going to take the time to do that because we've changed in Program Maker. We could change their positions with the properties. We could change their widths with the properties. I think that's good enough though. We run it and we see that we have some buttons. Why don't we change their colors? So we're going to go to the source. And not only are we going to set as text, JB dot set background, parentheses, your favorite color, color dot red, color dot blue. They didn't like that. Well, what's wrong with blue? All right, worked that time. And here we go. Here's our little buttons, which disappear if we click toggle and reappear. I'd like to add a scrolling dialog that prints which button was clicked. Button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4. Why don't we, instead of blanking them out, set the text of each button to a number, 1, 2, 3, or 4? Or in this case, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Yes?
I don't have all
I'm sorry. Come on.
No.
No problem. Well, isn't that unusual? Grab the mouse away from you. I'm going to make sure we don't have any invisible buttons hidden underneath here. it's being set to blue. But, okay, so button 5 and button 6 are the ones that needed to be added.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're getting a little quirky thing happening where when you run it, only some of the buttons are being colored blue, the problem is that the wrong buttons were added to the array list. So, that would mean that if you scroll down here, you would see some extra buttons that weren't actually placed on the screen. And Brian has this going on with a J panel, an extra panel that we can't find on the screen. We could find a list of all the controls and delete them, but the easy way to fix it is just to go here and do right-click, change variable name, and go, oh, that one was called 5, and oh, that one was called 6. All right, well, then in that case, I'm going to add those instead of 3 and 4. And so that fixed it for Lane. Yes, ma'am. Something's happened here. It won't compile. Grab the mouse away from me. Favorite error. Get that idea of adding in. Oh.
Okay, deliberately didn't add another one, figuring it was adding it, so.
What's going on? Yeah, probably be safe to delete that. No. When you say make all that go away, I thought you meant the comma. I could be wrong. Not what you meant.
That's what it meant, all this gray stuff.
We can't, we can minimize it.
Yeah.
That's the best we can do.
That's what it meant.
Yeah, that's the best we can do. Okay, so yeah, we just wound up with a missing one of those. Let's run it and see what it does.
Okay.
Kind of funky shape, but that's okay.
I just recreated it because I was
All right. So I'm going to grab the mouse away from here and just a couple of these for this. State of it. We're asking if it is. Change the state of principle. This dot K. So now what we're working on after that adding to the array list. Oh, and by the way, Lynn, move your for loop underneath init components. It seemed to work for you even though it was above it, but it worries me to see it below. Worries me to see it in the order in which it was. Alright, so. I would like to have it have some kind of counter so that each time we click on it, that thing's counter goes up. So we can set its text to a new value. So since we have 4 buttons, we're going to need an array like a 4 ints. So up above new JFrame, this is going to be a member. So public int counters equals new int subscript 4 in subscript. And what did I forget? Somebody tell me. I'm trying to make an array and I goofed it.
Oh, we forgot about this on the
Yeah. And honestly, since, yeah, angles without a number there. Honestly, since this is an array, this should have been an array as well. And I really hesitate to make this change. I don't think it's going to take that long. I'm going to delete the buttons list, sorry guys, and make it public J button with a capital J and a capital B, open square, close square, buttons equals new new J button with a capital J, capital B, subscript 4. And now instead of add, it needs to be subscript 0, subscript 1, subscript 2, and subscript 3 equals this .j button. So buttons subscript 0 equals that. Buttons subscript 1 equals that. Button subscript 2 equals that. I'm not sure I'm going to get the login and the panel going at this point. I mean a login dialog going. And button subscript 3 is equal to that. And to really be nice, I should delete those parentheses. They're spurious, aren't they? Now that should not have it should not have affected the way it looks, because all I did is I replaced the array list with an array. I'm going to need a function that will tell me which element in the index, and by the way, Brian, since we only added 2 buttons to yours, you're going to want to make your arrays 2 elements long rather than 4. We're going to need a function which, if passed a JButton reference, tells me its index position. Or I guess, is there an arrays.find? I'd rather do it this way, because I'm sure that I can roll my own. Public int search buttons, parentheses, JButton JB. Close parentheses, open curly, close curly. We're going to go through the array with a for loop, 4 parentheses int I equals 0, i's less, it ought to be buttons.length, correct? Buttons.length, I plus plus. And if buttons subscript I equals JB, and that should have been inside parentheses, return I. Return which index it was found. But if we don't find it, we were passed a bogus button, and we're going to return -1. And so now we need a method that when clicked will go and find which button was clicked, increment its counter, and set its text to that counter. So it doesn't even need to return anything, although it could, right? It could return a false if it doesn't find it. But public void change button, parentheses, capital J, capital B, UTTON, JB, close parentheses, open curly. We need to get which button we are. So int I equals search buttons, subscript JB. And as long as I is not equal to -1, then we have a good value. So if I greater than or equal to 0, close parentheses, counters subscript I plus plus, and let's set the text equal to the string value of that counter. So buttons subscript I, close subscript, dot, set text, parentheses in parentheses, but we need to set the value of our counter. So inside those parentheses, counters subscript I. And that gives me an error. So an int cannot be converted to a string. What's the cheap and sleazy way of creating an int? Excuse me, a string. It's just to make an open quote, close quote, plus, rather than calling toString or something like that. That's just the fastest possible way of doing it. I probably have introduced errors into this typing. Good? All right. Why he chose to spell check. Okay, so we have that function, but it's not being called by anything. What we have tried to do is to genericize it so that no matter how many buttons we had, they can all call the same function, right? I would not want to have to duplicate this code 20 times just because I had 20 buttons. So let's go add some event handlers. All they're going to do is call change button. So I'm going to go to the designer. I'm going to double click on J button 1. Add a J button action performed here. And so I'm going to do this dot change button parentheses. And right now we're on J button 1. So I'm just going to pass in J button 1, just like I suggested. And I'm going to hope it works. It did. I can't read my writing, I should change the foreground of it, but there's a 1 there. You know what would have been better than putting empty quotes? Would have been setting our spaces, setting our values to spaces. But we could set the width and the height of these things so that they wouldn't be floating around, you know, as we clicked them. Now, why aren't the rest of these working? Because we've only added an event listener for that one. So let's add one for the other buttons. If you only have 2 buttons, then add them for both. If you have 4, let's add one. So I'm going to click J button 2. And this one needs to be this dot change button, parentheses, J button 2. It's offering to fill it in with J button 1, but really we want J button 2. So as I click it, you can't see it on mine probably because of the colors, it's got a counter that's being created. If we initialize the counters to 0 rather than an empty space, it'd look a lot nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and add one, just for the sake of completeness, one to J button 3. This dot change button, J button 3. And after this, we ought to back off and create something that uses like text input, where you type in something and we do something with it and we add it to a scrolling text field. And then lastly, do that for J button 4. This dot change button, parentheses, J button 4. Now if you only have, right, 2 buttons, doesn't matter. In a lane, you probably had to make this J button 5 and J button 6. Right, okay. All right. I do want to make that change. I'm going to go up here to my constructor, and instead of setting the text equal to why am I not finding it? Right there. Instead of setting the text equal to that, I'm just going to set the text equal to 0. And I'm going to set the foreground color of them to a color that's easy to spot rather than black. So jb.set foreground, parentheses, color dot white. So if we were taking more time and we were trying to implement a game, we would have stuck this in a 2-dimensional array rather than a 1-dimensional array. We could have made it like a tic-tac-toe game, right? Where I clicked on a button and I put an X there, and somebody else clicked on a button and they put, you know, an O there. You can set images under your buttons so that, you know, you can create really fancy looking X's and O's. But what I want to do now is, this has been fairly esoteric, not intentionally too esoteric, but I wanted you to get the idea of setting your controls in an array so that you can manipulate them, which is a very useful concept, and not just in Java development, Java UI development, done it in C++ and a lot of other things. Let's drag some text fields out. Let's put our login button way down here so that we can then have like a username and a password. So I need a label for the username. So I'm going to drag a label out. I need a username for the password, so I'm going to drag another label out. And I need some input fields, which are called text fields. So I'm going to drag a text field out. And another text field out. Now I see one called password field. What's the difference between a text field and a password field? The password field just replaces everything you type in with a dot so nobody can see it. Bless you. So J text field 1, I don't want to have filled in with that text, so I'm going to right click on J text field 1 and edit the text to blank it out. Oh, bless you. And I need to change the text of these labels appropriately. Edit text ID. And then label 2, I'm going to right click, edit text, password. And maybe move my login button there. These really should have better names too. So I'm going to right click on the entry fields and change the variable name from text field 1 to text field underscore ID. And I'm going to change the password to change variable name jpassword field 1. That's pretty good. I'm digging that one. I'm going to take out the 1 off the end of it, but otherwise it's perfectly fine. And lastly, I want room to display some messages underneath. So I'm going to stretch this out and find a scrolling text field. Text area will do. Just to display some kind of message underneath it. We are going to be running out of time. I may start working too fast for y'all to follow. So you might just want to watch what I'm doing and get the idea, and then later on if you want to watch the last 10 minutes of the video.
Professor,
Yes?
were you going to talk about the final?
Sure. Sure. I was thinking about, I'm greedy. I want one more lecture period. So I'm thinking about saying that if you're happy with your final, with your average, you don't have to take the final. If you want to change, if you do want to take the final, you come in and take the final and you just close your ears and go la 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 and ignore the lecture. Or you can go to the library and take it if you need quiet. And otherwise, I want everybody to come in and just do the lecture with me. And if you take the lecture, then you get, then you get 100% on your final. So that's going to raise everybody's grade, right? So nobody's going to want to take the final, right? If you're getting a free 100% on it for showing up. I've done that for my scripting class. It only meets once a week as well because I'm greedy for time. Okay, so I really do want, we're not going to add too many things then. This won't take too long though. If you have these controls here, just know what their names are and double click on the login button. Double click on the login button. Right now it says login button pressed. We need to get that text out of the name. So let's do that. String ID equals, and what was the name of my field? This.jText field ID. Now yours may be called something else. If you didn't rename it, it's probably called jText field 1. And then jText field ID dot get text. Now we need the passwords text as well. String password equals this dot jpassword. This dot jpassword field dot get text parentheses in parentheses. I wonder why I crossed that off. I'm not liking it to cross that off. Well, I guess we'll find out. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to blow it off. Now I want to append that to our scrolling text area. So I need to get the text out of the scrolling text area. So string text equals this dot jText area dot get text parentheses in parentheses. And now we're going to add the name and the password to our text. So text plus equals quote login space end quote plus, this dot, no wait, no this, ID plus password. This is real cute because we're displaying the text, the password right on the screen after we were hiding it, with those dots. Plus a quote \n, end quote. And that should have been text, excuse me. And now we're going to set our text back into JText area. So this dot JText area dot set text, the text that we just modified. I'm going to find out why get text is grayed out. So hello. Goodbye. Log in. Log in, hello, goodbye. Okay, I don't really know why. Although it sure would have been nice if this was initialized to nothing, right? So in my form designer, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to right click and I'm going to change its text, edit its text, and back out all those circles. Because I thought that was really ugly. Oh, and look at that. It shrunk my fields down. Alright, fix that. Alrighty, so my ID is me, my password is secret, and I click login and it says login me secret. Right? We should do something more interesting than that. Our toggle button still works, our counters still work, we could have our whatever utility that those were going on with there, and we have a scrolling text field up here. What we would probably want to do is to make the scrolling text field non-editable. We could do that by changing one of its properties. I think that we are about done with this, though. Let me make a Dropbox for those who are done with it, and I'll do a quick wander around for everybody else. Does that make sense about the final, guys? You have to show up in order to get the free 100% on the final. You don't want to not take the final. Or show up, I mean. We all good with that, or does anybody object to that idea? Vitson hates it.
I object.
I object, Your Honor. Alrighty.
Earn your 90 points.
No, thank you. No. I'd rather not earn my 100%.
If I can get my 100% for free, that's what I want.
Really?
All right.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
You want me to earn them 90%.
I'm sorry. Okay.
All right, there's a Dropbox now. You'll see the Dropbox.